Right now, there are only a few kilometers left to Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russians have come right up to the region. But there's a catch. An expert explained the occupiers are headed for failure and Russia itself is facing a revolt. So what are we talking about? Let's go through everything step by step. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Renata Aslanova and here are the latest events. In the summer of 2025, the Russians want to fully capture the Donetsk region. This means enormous losses and will lead to the failure of the campaign and revolutionary sentiments within Russia. This is exactly the opinion expressed by political advisor Oleksandr Kharebin. According to him, the Russian summer offensive will stall due to unrealistic objectives. The reaction of Russians to failures at the front could very well pose a real threat of an uprising within the country. In fact, the occupiers are entering the summer campaign just as Ukraine entered the summer campaign of 2023.
There is a myth that we will now reach Melitopol just as the Russians want to capture the Donetsk region. These are two such situations, and unfortunately for us in 2023, but fortunately for us now, for the Russians, the summer campaign will end the same way. That is, these are meat grinder assaults. This is a situation where the Russians are losing.
According to him, even some Russian bloggers are openly predicting such a turn of events. At the same time, they do not rule out that the failure of the offensive could lead to riots or even a revolution.
Russian military bloggers are saying this directly, that Russia could find itself, say in October or November, in a situation like in 1917, when the so-called Brest-Litovsk peace happened, when the bayonets turned inward toward Russia. This is the only chance, in my opinion, this is the only chance to break.
The liberal opposition is now actively discussing exactly this point.
So for them,
but the basis is economic, right?
We'll come back to that in a moment. So this is a very important thing. In other words, there is no need to be afraid of the Russian summer offensive campaign.
Meanwhile, according to deep state data, the Russians are now just 2 and 6 kilometers away from the administrative border of the Dnipropetrovsk region. It is reported that Russia has occupied Troitske, which brings them significantly closer to the Dnipropetrovsk region. And recently, retired Lieutenant General Ihor Romanenko stirred everyone up. The Russian Federation has set its sights on 7 regions and is preparing a strike force. However, the Kremlin needs to accumulate the necessary resources and reserves. According to him, it is still too early to talk about the start of a large-scale Russian summer offensive. In his assessment, a possible Russian offensive could begin at the end of June or in July. Currently, Russia is forming a strike group of about 50,000 personnel in the Kharkiv direction. He noted that if we take into account Putin's statements about creating a so-called buffer zone, then this zone could include not only the Sumy and Kharkiv regions, but also the Dnipropetrovsk region. Everything will depend on how many forces the enemy is able to concentrate. He also noted that Putin continues to strive for the capture of 4 Ukrainian regions. Russia has already almost completely occupied the Luhansk region. Next in line are Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia. Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that Russian troops are advancing along the entire front. The Russians are trying to recover their strength, regroup, and have no intention of stopping. Analysts also note that Putin may be planning to occupy the city of Sumy and the Sumy region. Earlier, Putin announced plans to create a buffer zone near the Kursk, Bryansk, and Belgorod regions. Meanwhile, reports indicate that Russia is amassing significant forces near the front line for a possible new attack aimed at capturing additional territory. As one American official stated, the Russian command is trying to concentrate substantial military resources. In his opinion, the likely offensive may be aimed at further advances in eastern Ukraine.
Putin will try to seize all the territory he can, right up to the outskirts of Kiev. The Russians will make every effort to take everything they can.
The United States notes that although Russia has an advantage in manpower in eastern Ukraine and the Kursk region, its advance is hampered by Ukrainian drones and minefields. At the same time, Ukraine is facing a shortage of personnel, while Moscow is struggling to build up the necessary forces. Despite reports of significant losses among North Korean military personnel, American assessments indicate that there are currently no signs of a substantial increase in their presence in Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
This summer, Russia may launch a new large-scale offensive in the Donetsk region. It is likely already beginning against the backdrop of a stalled peace process mediated by the United States. So what is happening on the front lines, and what is known about the Kremlin's plans? Watch next.
A recent and ongoing devastating escalation of strikes targeting peaceful Ukrainian cities.
Gleb Vasilyev, significant activation of the occupiers on the front.
The further it goes, the harder it will become in Sumy region, in Kharkiv region, and in the east. We are ready. But is society ready for the reality of an active war?
Reality demonstrates the Kremlin's negotiation efforts are a bluff. Putin seeks war and new conquests.
The Russians are pushing in like madmen there. Right now, they are trying, or at least preparing, to force the Dnipro, even if only on a small scale, to create certain tactical bridgeheads on the right bank. That's why strikes are happening practically along the entire length of the front. That's about 1,500 kilometers from the Kingisepp spit almost to Tetkino.
Ukrainian and European experts agree that the goal of the occupying army is to advance in the Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipropetrovsk regions.
What we're talking about is that the Russian Federation will push for its own vision of ending the war, namely territorial concessions from Ukraine at the moment when units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces withdraw from the controlled areas of the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions.
According to the British outlet Sky News, Russia is amassing tens of thousands of soldiers who were released after the end of the Ukrainian armed forces operation in the Kursk region near the borders with Kharkiv Oblast. Kharkiv. Why are Russian troops gathering near the Ukrainian fortress city? After Kyiv's forces were pushed out of Kursk, Russian troops have been massing on the other side of the border from Ukraine's second largest city. The plan is to seize territory for the sake of exchange. Any success in the Sumy or Dnipropetrovsk regions, the Kremlin will try to use as a bargaining chip for Ukrainian territories that are written into the Russian constitution.
The creation of a so-called buffer zone is intended to exert military and political pressure on the Ukrainian leadership. So to emphasize once again, it appears that the proposals will specifically concern the withdrawal of Ukrainian Defense Forces units from the territory of Donetsk region in exchange for accordingly ending the active phase of hostilities in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions.
According to the German outlet Bild, one of the most important and most difficult changes on the front for Ukrainian defenders is the significant progress made by the occupying army in the drone war. The Russians are copying the tactics of the opposing side and in doing so are achieving success. With thousands of new drones and electronic warfare systems, they are now hunting Ukrainian logistics and disabling dozens of them every day. At the same time, it should be remembered that during more than 3 years of positional warfare, Russia has spent most of the time in a creeping offensive anyway.
The talk about a planned summer offensive does not correspond to reality. The offensive has not stopped for a single day. Ukraine's territorial losses in April amounted to about 150 square kilometers. These 150 square kilometers were given up to the Russians at the cost of personnel losses. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, this is about 45,000.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian defenders and special services are not sitting idly by, waiting for the enemy to act. Among the latest achievements, Gur fighters struck at logistics deep in the rear, destroying a Russian military train and fuel tanks in the temporarily occupied territory of Zaporizhia region.
And what do you think about the latest events on the front line? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button under the video and stay up to date with the main news. More to come.